perhaps I'll just kick off our conversation today by asking you how this started. Where did the idea come from? How did this begin?
Thanks so much for having us and letting us tell you more about this campaign, Live the Life You Please. I'm thrilled to be part of this. Sue and I are producers of the film, which has been developed in close collaboration with Palliative Care Australia. So it's wonderful to have Camilla Rowland joining us as well, who is an executive producer on the project. So the project really started from a passion that Sue and I had for telling a story about palliative care in Australia. We've had the opportunity to tell many stories about palliative care, and some in Australia, but mostly abroad, and thought that it was about time that there was more focus put on our work in this area.
Oh, that's so, yeah. And what, you're filmmakers, so I guess it's it kind of telling stories and sharing stories. Film is really well suited for that medium. It's right in your wheelhouse, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And sharing stories is a really powerful way to convey messages that's not so educational or fact-based. You can be much more engaging with the storytelling, and people's own stories are always, in my opinion, as a documentary filmmaker, I think they're way more interesting than fiction most of the time. So that's yeah.
Yeah. Camilla, how did you get involved in this?
So it sounds very fancy, executive producer, doesn't it? I'm still, waiting to see when the millions come to flow to Palliative Care Australia from a box office hit. But look, if we think about advocacy and, if we're talking about meaningful aging, I feel like I'm starting to meaningfully age myself and being in my late 50s. But the whole idea around telling stories it's one of the three pillars of good advocacy. You need your evidence and your statistics. You need your key asks based on that evidence, but without the stories to illustrate the points, I find that most politicians are not moved as easily. And I've got a great story behind, in fact, I think Sue and Mike were involved in this. There was some filming of a story of a dad who had to care for his wife and then separately care for his son, who both had life-limiting illnesses and both did end up passing away. And his story so moved one of our ministers that they actually, after talking with that dad, invested significant money into paediatric palliative care. Now, without that story, yes, it probably would have happened at some point in the future, but it really resonated with that particular politician that we needed to do something now. So I think that the idea of the film and the stories that come with a film actually show across the different generations the experiences that people have in their journey of quality of life in thinking about and planning for end of life. And we will be able to use it in so many ways to illustrate what needs to happen in Australia for quality palliative care.
I love the way you framed that as part of advocacy, and that story resonated, because that's the thing, isn't it? It's about, we know that from our own advocacy efforts, there's got to be a way to cut through and to reach the heart and the mind. And sometimes, and because we don't know everybody's personal stories, but they do. So when they see something that makes them feel something, now we're talking. Now we're actually in conversation.
And I think it's now part of all the timing. So if we had these stories 10, 15 years ago, I'm not sure that the public was ready to see some of these stories then. Death and dying and end-of-life journeys was all a bit of a taboo subject. And I think, with the emergence of voluntary assisted dying, whether you were in agreement or not, it's still that's breaking down those taboos about talking about death and dying. Yeah. So with the emergence of that and discussions about other, illnesses such as dementia, motor neurone disease, all those conversations has made a situation where it's all coming together for the timing to talk about and show films like Sue and Mike are developing to show that story.
Yeah. And Mike and Sue, I'm going to urge people to go to the website. I know that Marnie's going to keep putting the website address in the chat, but it's livethelifeyouPlease.com. It's .com, isn't it? Yeah, livethelifeyouPlease.com. And there's a whole lot of information on that website, but there's also a lot of mini video stories, and they're all terrific. But Mike had sort of, shared a few things in a chat that we had this week. And so I jumped onto the website, and there's two that I'd love you to talk about. One is about Malala aged care, and being on country for Indigenous elders, and the other is what I'm sure is probably a crowd pleaser, but I'm thinking too of Camilla that we're only just ready to hear stories like this, because the story that's entitled "Husband in a Handbag" can actually be quite confronting, I think, for some people, the idea of it. But it's really, when you hear his wife talk about the role that he still plays in the family and the community. See, I've just got goosebumps. Please tell us about those stories a little bit more.
Yeah, well, we're actually tuning in today from a location in Sydney where we're capturing a story. So we're very thankful to be here. And we've been, I think, just really privileged, haven't we, Sue, to be able to get around the country from regional areas to very remote places and capital cities, gathering different stories, and the generosity of all those people sharing their stories. But the one you mentioned, Jackie, from Malala Health, Malala Health is an Aboriginal controlled health organisation based in Maningrida in Arnhem Land. It's a large remote Aboriginal community of a little over 2,000 people, and it has the most beautiful aged care facility located in the best spot in town. And this is a remarkable spot to begin with. But it looks out over the Arafura Sea, and crocodiles regularly swim past, and the residents will point them out and get excited. Buffaloes will come and eat the grass on the front lawn. And what I love about this story is how well the service is adapted to the needs of its residents. And we saw that when we were there, in terms of bush food being eaten regularly at the aged care facility, and having a barbecue there where you could eat a kangaroo if you wanted to. Also welcoming extended family members into the actual service for an overnight stay. When we were there was an old fella who was in his last days, and he had babies in his room with him. He had all of his daughters, all of his family. There were about 20 family members either in his room or camped outside of his room. And that was beautiful to see. And it was hard to imagine for me seeing that anywhere else in Australia.
Yeah.
But probably most remarkably was the story that you mentioned is about going on an excursion out to going on country to do some important work for the residents. And this was a very exciting day where we were given permission by the traditional owners to visit Crab Creek with the aged care service and many of the residents from the aged care, who went out into a very remote location, about 45 minutes of bush bashing to get there. And these somewhat frail looking residents that we'd seen in aged care sort of came to life as soon as they stepped on country and started hunting, fishing, gathering shellfish, catching barramundi, lighting fires to protect the country. And we spent the most remarkable day with them. And they had the amazing Karen Yarnold, who's the aged care services manager, working closely with residents to dig up roots of particular plants that could be used to dye pandanus leaves that she was also harvesting to weave into artwork. So this is an example of an aged care facility that's really tailored its service to its community and the needs of that community.
I mean, it was absolutely amazing, wasn't it, to that the point that was made was that these elders are used to spending that much time outside, and in fact more used to that than being inside. And that's a real shift for us to think about, and why it's so important. That phrase "on country" is literal. It's not figurative. It is a literal need in that culture. But then I also think we've got older Australians who aren't Indigenous, who have also spent so much time, whether it's because they're farmers or they've always, bushwalked or loved bird watching or whatever that is, and how we need to bring some of this learning that the Indigenous cultures teach us and show us, and make sure that everyone is able to have the life that they need to have until they pass. Yeah, it was beautiful. I love that clip. Yeah. What about husband? What about husband in a handbag?
That was a remarkable story as well. So we were up in Coffs Harbour, and we were introduced to Julie, who had, she's had an extraordinary experience through her husband having a very debilitating accident when I think their first child was only a toddler, and she was pregnant with their second child. So and it was the incident caused her husband to become a quadriplegic, so their entire life completely changed. And he'd been a real life of the community, big rugby player, very big personality, and that didn't change. So they continued on as a family, and the community rallied around them, and they had this amazing house that's the story's known as the house that Coffs built, and they lived there very, very happily and had a really wonderful life. But then unfortunately, Julie's husband, developed a cancer. I think it was a skin cancer, melanoma. And it was very advanced at the time when they discovered it, and so he decided not to have treatments, because being a quadriplegic and all the complications that would go with it. So they went into palliative care, and they had an amazing GP that looked after them as well. And then, so I'll let you tell the actual handbag story.
Oh yeah, or Camilla. I mean, so the wishes of this family was that Elle stayed at home for as long as possible. So it was already a very accessible space, but with the support of community palliative care, and importantly their GPs. They had two GPs, a male and female husband and wife combination, who are very remarkable, who would come and I think that was very important. Yeah. You got something there, Jackie, to say?
No, you just dropped out for a second, and
sorry.
I was thinking that we might have a potential drama, but we don't.
No worries. Yeah, so they were supported, as well as community palliative care, by two amazing GPs who I think importantly came and did home visits. And at one point, Elle, who was going through this end of life experience, said to one of his GPs, the thing that I want is to be with Jules after I pass away. And the day after he passed away, at home with all of his family around him, in what they considered a very good death, Lois, who's one of the GPs, showed up with a very expensive $800 handbag and handed it over to Jules. And subsequently, Elle's ashes and now reside in this handbag, which is regularly loaned out to members of the family and taken on excursions to the pub and the rugby club and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. But I'm interested, Camilla, to hear your response to that story as well.
Yeah, I think palliative care is all about quality of life, and when you live the life that you please, it means that you have control about what happens at the end of life. So the idea is that palliative care services should be delivered in a way that suits you. And yes, there are stories with humour, because some people deal with grief and deal with their situation with humour, and that's fine. Some people feel that it's a very sad time the whole time. That's fine too. It's just I think the stories show the different scenarios that people have in their lives and the way they deal with things, and they're all okay. There's this, I actually worked for a number of years in palliative care itself in rural Australia, and we used to have this saying in our palliative care team, it's you live as you die, or you die as you live. And that is that if you're a person with quirky humour, like the story of the handbag, then that's probably how you'll end your life as well. So, and that's okay. So the conversations are really about, there's no such thing as being the right way to do things. It's actually what suits you. What I'm hoping the stories will also highlight is what the benefits of quality palliative care can be, so that people understand that they have that choice. But what we do know in reality at the moment, and this is where we'll use it as an advocacy tool, is that not everybody has access to palliative care. We know, of the 100,000 people who die each year in Australia from life-limiting illnesses, only 60,000 access palliative care. So that's 6 out of 10 people. And we call it a bit of a postcode lottery. What we want to be able to demonstrate to the policy and funding people, governments mostly, is that really we need to increase the investment in palliative care so that, Joe Smith on the street, anyone can access palliative care no matter where they live. And it's not just about the nursing and the medical doctoring as well. They're really key, but palliative care is holistic. So it's actually looking after people's spiritual needs, their emotional and psychological needs, and their social needs. And so the palliative care teams should be, in essence, multidisciplinary teams. And that's really key to it as well. I know that Sue and Mike, through these films, are going to show different types of workers and scenarios that people have been involved with in receiving palliative care.
That's right, Camilla. We've been, very fortunate we've been able to see a lot of different people at a lot of different stages in their journey. And so the stories are very diverse everyone's got a very different experience. And that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're witnessing, is that no person has the same journey, no person has the same care needs, and no person has the same wants as well. And so it's really interesting exploring with all the different stories, but capturing what those different needs are and perhaps why people are making decisions, and what that support network around them is enabling them. So they might be making decisions that they may not have been able to make had they not had a particular type of care available to them. So yeah, there's a real diversity in all of the stories that we're capturing.
Yeah, I think something you've just said there, Sue, really just a little light bulb, is that people also have permission to make decisions, but they don't necessarily know that they do. Some, the generation that we see in aged care at the moment, I was just having a chat to one of our members, one of our CEO members yesterday, about how overly compliant they can be to not present themselves as a burden in any way. And so I guess part of this mission is really to help everyone understand that everyone has a right to make decisions about the way they want to live and about the way they want to die. And and to be able to see a range of different perspectives, none of which are any less sacred than another. But sacred doesn't necessarily have to be somber either to someone. And so I think those stories that you're filming really bring that to life. But how are you finding these stories? Where are they coming from? Are people getting in touch with you, or Camilla, are you bringing people to Sue and Mike? How's that whole process working? Because you're going far and wide.
Yeah, well, we put Sue and Mike in touch with some of the palliative care services that have interconnected them with families and individuals of life-limiting illnesses. And Sue and Mike, you've probably got, through your own network, people you've reached out to as well, haven't you?
Yeah, it has been a combination, definitely a combination of the suggestions you've made and those networks, and then past networks from other projects we've done. And we've been really fortunate because people are, I'm always so amazed at how willing people are to have a film crew rock up and be part of their world, and let a camera be pointed at them when they're going through some pretty difficult things. So yeah, we've definitely been working closely with a lot of different project partners to, you know, to find the stories and people who are, you know, happy to be participants in it.
We have a terrific group of sponsors for the project, and they're really quite diverse. And this really shows the willingness for all parts of the Australian community to see the need to, you know, have better integration of services and more universal access to these services across Australia. And I think we've been really blessed in terms of the stories that we've been able to capture through that network. And for your audience, Jackie, I think it's important for everyone to know that we're working on a feature film. So that's the main part of this communications effort that also includes short films like the ones we've been talking about today. But the feature film is scheduled for release in May next year. And we would really encourage everyone here to get along to it, to see it, to maybe show it to their community, to help get that conversation going around what we want for our loved ones and ourselves when that time comes for us. And I found it really interesting, actually, in a recent interview we did with a very senior health leader who was the head of an emergency department, saying, reflecting that as important as emergency medicine is for so many things, being in emergency or in the ICU is actually the last place that he would want to be himself when that time comes. But the only way that people can really take a little bit more control over those decisions, if that's what they want for themselves or their loved ones, is to have a conversation. And that's what this project's all about.
Yeah, getting those conversations started, definitely.
We might have to have you back next year as you get closer to the launch or around the launch, because that would be great to follow this through. If anyone is listening today and thinking, oh, I've got a story, is there a facility on your website to contact you?
There should be, or they can just send an email to hello@moonshine.agency. Perhaps we could pop that in the chat.
Yeah, hello@Moonshine Agency.
So moonshine.agency.
Moonshine.agency. Is there a .com or something
No
else?
.com. No .com.
No .com. I haven't noticed that. There's all these different formats.
We've been really thrilled to take you up on that opportunity, Jackie, to do something around the launch, but it might be worth Camilla chiming in here about next year's National Palliative Care Week, because the release of the film will time out with that, and perhaps some of the themes that we've been talking about resonate with that too, Camilla.
Yeah, so when we think about where we're at in that trajectory of aged care reform, what we're thinking about in relation to the impact of COVID on the health workforce, all of you will have seen the news and across in the different states of Australia about how our particularly our nursing and medical workforce is really suffering at the moment from people exiting it out and burnout, etc. We're going to have a real focus at the National Palliative Care Week event next year around workforce and through people's stories to talk about how important the workforce has been to them. So National Palliative Care Week is the last week of May, and we're aiming to launch the film then. And generally what we do is it becomes quite a feature within the government's calendar as well. So it's not only raising awareness about end of life and about palliative care to the broader community, but it's also highlighting for politicians about where we're at in our journey of creating a better health system and a better aged care system. So many of you will know, for example, the in-home care program that's part of the aged care reform. The rollout of that has been postponed until July 2023. So we'll be thinking about what does that look like and how is that emerging, and is it actually emerging the way that the aged care sector would like to, and the palliative care sector? Are they addressing the embedding of palliative care in aged care for the aged care workforce? So, you know, that's probably our biggest issue in terms of aged care reform at the moment, is our concerns around whether the reform around embedding palliative care into aged care is actually happening in a practical way in terms of that reform change to the programs that's taking place. Yeah. So those sorts of things we'll be able to highlight at National Palliative Care Week. And through this film will illustrate people's journeys of what good quality end of life care looks like, but also about advanced care planning. We haven't really mentioned that yet, because you can see through some of these stories where people have sort of thought ahead and thought about what they would like to have happen in their last journey of life. And that those quality of life events and connections to family that are really important to people. And I think because it's going to illustrate a whole range of those points, this film, it's going to resonate definitely with policymakers and decision makers, not just with the community. It's been really interesting. We're sort of in this threshold period of time in Australian history where we're talking about people's choices and right to end lives and right to have access to quality end of life care, etc. And what needs to happen in line with that is that quality healthcare services and aged care services need to grow along the same time with our growing population. Because, for example, we know that through KPMG's report, Investing to Save, we know that by 2040, the number of people who are ageing in Australia and will require palliative care is going to double. So we talk about 100,000 now, that's going to double to 200,000 people by 2040, which actually isn't that far away. And we have no planning in Australia by governments for that future. But all they're doing at the moment is investing in the now. So we really, through the power of these films and the power of the public voice, we need to impress upon people that for meaningful ageing to occur, there needs to be the thinking around how do we embed into good quality end of life care across our health system and into our aged care system.
Yeah.
So you've got me on an advocacy rant now.
So true. So true. Yeah. Well, represent. Fantastic. I mean, keep going. No, you can't keep going actually, Camilla, because we're running out of time. But no, thank you. I think that's critical. And you know, one of the things that that we know, the tension around government that's always been is that it's, you know, vision tends to be term-based rather than needs-based. So it's yeah, I think having different kinds of campaigns, and this film is definitely a different kind of campaign, because also the film isn't coming out of nowhere. You know, you're generating and sharing all of these stories along the way, which I think is what makes it such a powerful campaign, and one that I'm so glad that you came along today and shared with our community. So thank you very much, Sue and Mike and Camilla. We will look forward very much to the progress. And again, Marnie, can you just pop in the chat the website, which is livethelifeyouPlease.com, and go and have a look at some of the stories and learn a bit more about the project. Thank you very much, everybody.